Hello, church. We're looking at Ezekiel 20 today, and we had a short chapter last week, but not the case this week. A long chapter, very good chapter, as all of them are. And we'll start right off. Ezekiel has the occasion where some of the elders of Israel came to him and wanted to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord remembers this because he very specifically states the time, the date, that they came. It came to pass in the 7th year, verse 1, in the 5th month, in the 10th day of the month. So the Lord remembers exactly the day they came. And they came to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord had a word for them. He said, "You come to inquire of me? I don't think so. Let's go back over your history a little bit of where you've been, and then I'll explain my position to you on this matter." And it takes them back to the history of the Israelites, and we could say they were a stiff-necked, rebellious people. He talks about in Egypt. He came to them and they were stiff-necked and rebellious. And he talks about in the wilderness. Boy, they were stiff-necked. They wouldn't go into the promised land, and they rebelled against him. They rebelled against Moses and just continually fought against him. They gave him statutes and laws and guidance, and they rebelled against it. Gave him a Sabbath, and they wouldn't keep the Sabbath. And then he speaks of in Canaan, even in the promised land, they still wouldn't give up their false gods and their false idols. They still rebelled and murmured and chafed against what the Lord's direction was for them. And he says, well, let's look at today, starting in verse 29. He says, and look at you today. You're no different. You're no different than your fathers. You're just as rebellious. And so, no, I'm not going to listen to you. And why did the Lord stay with them all this time? You know, we're studying on Wednesday night, and I do pray you'd come on Wednesday night because it's been a great study going through the history of Israel. And we've just recently studied the account where the golden calf, and Moses came down, and God said, "Get out of my way, Moses. I'm wiping them out. I'm starting over with you." And Moses stood in the gap and interceded for the people and reminded the Lord of his name and his promise he made. He said, what are all the nations around here going to think when you wipe them out? You delivered them out of Egypt, but you couldn't keep them in the wilderness. And so the Lord repented and didn't destroy them. And why? For his name's sake, for his covenant's sake. And in verse 9, verse 22, and verse 44 in this chapter, the Lord reminds people, verse 9 he said, "But I wrought for my name's sake." Verse 22, "Nevertheless I withdrew mine hand and wrought for my name's sake." And then over in 44, we'll see again, for his name's sake. So he didn't completely destroy the people for his name's sake, for his covenant that he had made with him. Not for their sake, but for his sake, to honor his name and honor the covenant that he had made with them. And then he promises toward the end, in 33 there, he says, "As I live, saith the Lord, surely with a mighty hand and with a stretched out arm, and with fury poured out, will I rule over you." He says, I will rule over you. Stiff-necked and rebellious you are, I will rule over you. And he talks more of the prophecy and says there's a fire coming, a purging of fire, and you're going to be purified, and I'm going to rule over you. Tough words, harsh words, but a loving God dealing with rebellious people. Be blessed today, Ezekiel 20.